From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. Even by Donald Trump standards, it was a pretty bizarre social media post that went up 6 days ago. A very gothic, AI-generated music video depicts a dark, brooding sky over Washington, D.C., as Donald Trump, in a black cape and hood, is banging a bell and J.D. Vance is on the drums behind him. From the dark storm raging around Washington emerges another figure, dressed as the Grim Reaper, wielding his scythe. Is the Reaper. He wields a pen, the fun's and the brain. Here comes the Reaper, done to your babies. Russell Vogt is the Reaper, we're told, as a man with distinctly unthreatening glasses stares menacingly into the camera. The song rolls on. Here comes the Reaper. Dems, you babies, gonna tie your hands. What, you may be wondering, is that about? The answer, believe it or not, is the ongoing US government shutdown. It's been a week, and neither the Republicans nor the Democrats are backing down. Unless they can agree and pass a bill about how government services are funded, that funding just won't happen. Services have ground to a halt as 250,000 government employees are furloughed without pay. And now, raising the stakes, Donald Trump is threatening to use this period to send in the Grim Reaper, to slash back the size of government so that many of those employees won't have jobs to come back to.
Right now, federal workers are bracing for potential mass layoffs as we enter day 3 of a government shutdown. Now, the White House says thousands of employees are at risk.
Well, there could be firings, and it could also be other things. I mean, we could cut projects, favorite projects, and they'd be permanently cut.
So who is Russell Vogt, the Grim Reaper from the video? What is Donald Trump's plan? And how might this shutdown change America and its relationships around the world? The story today: how President Trump's Grim Reaper is trying to reshape America.
If you log on to certain government departments, you'll get a variety of different messages. So, for example, on the US Department of Treasury website, it says, the radical left has chosen to shut down the United States government in the name of reckless spending and obstructionism.
That's Lara Spirit.
I'm Washington correspondent at The Times. I'm based here in DC.
And Lara, a week into the shutdown, what's the mood like in DC? You know, if you were walking around, would you notice that the shutdown is in place? What would you see? What are the visible signs?
There have been pictures of empty metro stations, and when you go to the busier areas at lunchtime, sometimes you might notice fewer people. But one of the most remarkable things, perhaps, about the fact that vast swathes of the government have been abruptly shut down is that visibly it's not necessarily clear to the naked eye, even here in Washington, DC, which is the hub of government.
Lara, I mean, take us back to the start, because it may not feel like it walking around DC, but these are clearly remarkable times. How did we get here? What exactly is a shutdown?
So a shutdown is what happens when Congress fails to pass legislation that would fund the government for the upcoming fiscal year. And this means that there's a lapse of funding for a number of federal agencies. It means that they can't operate until they get a temporary, something called a continuing resolution passed. Not absolutely everything closes, right? You'll still have air traffic controllers who are forced to go to work. You'll have a number of the members of the military who are forced to go to work, and not everybody by any means is furloughed here, but it does mean that there is a very significant and extensive shutdown of government operations.
Remind us when it came into place and where negotiations currently stand.
Yeah, so the shutdown came into place last week following a long-running dispute over the expiration of healthcare subsidies, of Obamacare subsidies that were put in place during the pandemic and which have stopped a number of people from losing access to their healthcare or seeing their premiums, their costs of their healthcare rise. The Democrats, and most notably Chuck Schumer, the minority Senate leader for the party, and Hakeem Jeffries, who is the minority leader in the House of Representatives, have forced this government shut down on the basis that they want to have a serious negotiation about these healthcare subsidies, which are not a small deal, we should say. The Congressional Budget Office expects that millions of people will lose their healthcare as a result of the changes that are due to come into force and that Democrats are seeking to reverse. But it does mean that the Democrats are basically blaming this shutdown on the Republicans. So absent an agreement, we went into a government shutdown last week, and every day since, barring a few days at the weekend and on the day of Yom Kippur, we have seen a vote from the Senate to try and pass something called a kind of clean resolution bill, something that would mean that the government could reopen. But we have seen absolutely no movement whatsoever towards that. So we're still very much in deadlock here in DC.
Wow, so this has clearly become a huge political wrangle. Democrats wanting the Republicans to look bad, Republicans wanting the Democrats to look bad, but basically over healthcare subsidies. And now the whole of government, apart from the really essential parts, has shut down. Do you think there's an end in sight?
That's the big question, Manveen, and actually nobody has a very good answer to that at the moment, because the Republican theory, at least, was that in raising the stakes of the shutdown, they would hope that the cost would be so great to Democrats that they would say, actually, this isn't worth shutting down the whole government over this question of healthcare. Actually, what seems to have happened is an ever so slight movement in the other direction. The Democrats think that everybody's talking about healthcare suddenly. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a very, very right-wing member of the House and a keen Trump supporter, has herself recently spoken about the rising healthcare costs of her two adult children as a result of this. So there will still be negotiation going on, but at the moment it's very hard to see how either of the parties budge in the immediate term.
And Lara, we should say, although it sounds incredibly dramatic, the idea of shutting down government, it's not new. This has happened before. Just remind us when this has happened in the past and why it feels like it's becoming more common.
What's interesting about this is that actually we had more shutdowns in the 80s and 90s than we have in the few decades since. But generally, shutdowns are seen to have become longer on average and more damaging, to have a kind of bigger impact when they happen in recent years. The one that people always mention here in DC is the 2018 shutdown under President Trump, still the longest to date, 35-day shutdown. And that was over a demand from President Trump to fund his border wall with Mexico. And he wanted billions of dollars towards doing that. In the end, he decided that he would find the money from the defense budget instead and agreed to reopen the government. We've obviously seen shutdowns in previous years, but noticeably, although there were levels of political acrimony, there was nothing as kind of aggressive as what we've seen in the last week or so, where there's been a lot of real fighting talk from both sides. You know, you literally turn on TV and one of those leaders will be on railing against their opponents.
Well, Donald Trump and Republicans definitively wanted to shut down the government. For them, cruelty is the point.
Democrats still cannot get over the fact that the American people elected President Trump.
The Democrats are causing the loss of a lot of jobs with their it's a shutdown.
Instead of trying to solve this shutdown crisis, Donald Trump spent the weekend golfing and posting memes and deep fakes on the internet. He seems to think this shutdown is some big joke.
In this kind of much more polarized political atmosphere that we have, these shutdowns are taking on a kind of more unique tinge than they have, I think, in previous years.
They're even more political. And Lara, this one does feel different. You know, you mentioned that the longest in the past, the 31 days, was under President Trump the first time round. This one, he seems to be upping the stakes. Tell us why this one seems to have taken on a dimension of its own.
Yes, so the reason why this one is being seen as very unique is that shortly before it happened, there was a memo from a man called Russell Vought, who is the White House budget director. He runs something called the Office for Management and Budget.
Doesn't sound
Spicy, does it?
No, it doesn't sound particularly threatening, or like the sort of person you normally hear about.
No, but he is a extraordinary power broker in Washington. He has something of a mythical quality because people regularly talk about just how well he understands the mechanisms of government and how firmly determined he is to leave a permanent mark on how government spending and presidential power particularly works in Washington. He issued this memo to departments before the shutdown, telling them to prepare to make some of those jobs that would be furloughed during the shutdown. And we should say that when a government shuts down, workers are furloughed. But then when the government reopens, they have got their back pay.
Right. So they come back to work and they receive money for the time they were off, effectively.
And everything carries on. I don't mean to diminish how significant it is for some people in this respect, but they will have the chance to get that pay afterwards. What we've seen this time is a claim from Russell Vought before that some of these furloughs could be made permanent. This would be an opportunity for the administration to make some of these job losses permanent.
Well, there could be firings, and that's their fault. And it could also be other things. I mean, we could cut projects that they wanted, favorite projects, and they'd be permanently cut. So you could say, a lot of people are saying Trump wanted this, that I wanted this closing, and I didn't want it. But a lot of people are saying it because I'm allowed to cut things that should have never been approved in the first place.
People have said, well, it raises the stakes for the Democrats significantly. Are they willing to see thousands potentially of federal workers lose their jobs on account of a shutdown that may not see them make any meaningful inroads on the question of healthcare spending? And there's been a second development from Russell Vought, which is also a White House memo that we've seen reported in recent days that says it's not totally clear that they do think that furloughed workers will actually get their back pay once this shutdown ends.
You mentioned the man at the heart of all of this is Russell Vought. I mean, tell us a bit more about him. He's not somebody most of our listeners will be aware of in Britain. A man from the Office of Management and Budget doesn't usually make it into the headlines. So who is he?
He has been involved in the Trump administration since the first time round from 2020. He actually served as the director of the OMB as well.
And what do we know about his time during Trump 1.0? I mean, what was he doing? What sort of cuts was he trying to make?
So he's perhaps best known, or at least to many international readers, as being one of the key architects of that freeze in military assistance to Ukraine that came in under 2019. And he is a vocal opponent of aid to the country, but he's also, I think, perhaps most well-known, at least, within DC, for his views on the bureaucracy, federal bureaucracy and government. And he has said previously that he wanted bureaucrats to be traumatically affected by what would come in the Trump administration.
When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want to put them in trauma.
He's been very open about his desire for a smaller government and to see a big change, fundamental change to the way that the bureaucracy works.
80% of my time is working on the plans of what's necessary to take control of these bureaucracies. And we are working doggedly on that, whether it's destroying their agency's notion of independence. They're independent from the president. I want to be the person that crushes the deep state.
So he is known as a long-time budget hawk, and obviously having served in that role, he went away and he did a lot of thinking in those years during the Biden administration about what he would do, what the Trump administration should do if they were to have this opportunity again. And he played a very significant role in something called Project 2025, which some of your listeners will have heard of, which was a potential roadmap for a second Trump administration to advance some particular particular policies. Now, what's significant about this was that it wasn't officially associated with the Trump campaign at the time. In fact, Trump repeatedly disavowed any link with the project, and there'd been some reporting about perhaps some of the more unpopular measures in that project document. It was some people who thought that it seemed, a bit too right-wing for them, perhaps, I think is a gentle way of saying it. And what we're seeing from Trump in recent days is actually when he announced that he was going to be meeting with Vote, he described him as of Project 2025 fame. In other words, now quite comfortable seemingly with associations with this project.
Right, so he seems to be embracing the idea of Project 2025. And just remind us of sort of some of the key points in that.
So it's got a number of proposals around immigration, so particularly increasing funding for the border wall with Mexico. It does say that one of the abortion pills should be withdrawn from the market, and kind of explored ways that you could use laws to stop that being sent through the post to women who wanted it. Now we're looking at these parts of the plan a lot more, but the proposals around the federal bureaucracy, particularly independent agencies, being put under more direct presidential control. And there's this idea that the president can have more of a positive impact in government if they are given more power. That's the most basic way I can put it.
Lara, we've been talking about how President Trump has been threatening to use the shutdown to make really radical changes to the federal government. Huge potential job losses, big cuts. You've told us a bit about the man who seems to have given Donald Trump that idea, the Office of Management and Budget Director, Russell Vought. We sort of saw some of those cuts starting to come into place. Some of the things suggested in Project 2025 under Doge and Elon Musk. How thorough has that been? I mean, how much change has already happened?
Well, it's very interesting, the kind of comparisons between Elon Musk and Russell Vought, because, Vought is someone who's thought about this for years and years and years, and we shouldn't underestimate how much work he has done in thinking about the inner workings of government and the mechanisms of doing these things in a way that would be perhaps durable and lasting. One of, obviously, the key moments in the Doge story and Elon Musk is what happened to USAID and the complete dismantling of that agency at rapid speed. And of course, now there are a number of legal challenges. It is a question of, how successful will a number of these challenges be in the court? And in many ways, we're yet to see. But acting as quickly as they have, there's no way that USAID is going to be restored now to anything like what it's ever been before. And Russell Vought would clearly look at what happened with Doge and say, whatever the success of it, it's unfinished business. And there are a number of departments across government which could use a great deal of moving and cuts and change. And that's something that he'll be looking at the moment, and will have a real opportunity to enact in the years ahead.
Just talk us through what would actually happen, though, if this vision became reality. I mean, what sort of programs, what sort of agencies, departments, where would the cuts come?
Well, that is the kind of massive question at the moment. It's instructive to look at the list of what departments have furloughed higher proportions of their workforce, such as, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Education Department. They have, furloughed upwards of 70-80% of their staff. If you look at that 900-page Heritage Project document, you'll see that there's a huge amount of criticism around things like, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. But the truth is that we don't know. And all we know from Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, who has stuck with this line repeatedly in recent days, is that there are ongoing conversations between Vought and various members of the administration and wider government about exactly where these unfortunate cuts might fall.
Do we have a sense of the scale of job losses that would come? I mean, how many people would suddenly be unemployed? What would that do to American society?
We have already seen a huge number of layoffs. The federal workforce is going through really significant changes anyway as a result of what happened with the Department of Government Efficiency. So we are seeing some of those changes happen, but obviously if this was to happen on a very large scale, it would be even bigger, and it would be hard to say what the overall impact of that would be. Clearly, we are moving towards a question of whether or not President Trump is going to be handed more power, whether the executive branch is going to be handed more power. And I think for that particular question, we're going to have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. The stakes have been raised on both sides, but particularly from President Trump in terms of how this shutdown might end. It does feel like it's hugely consequential, but will it be? I mean, how radical can President Trump really afford to be? Is the whole of the Republican Party backing him on this?
I think there is an assumption among some that the federal workforce is perhaps a constituency that the Republican Party can afford to lose. Some of them, believe that many of those in the workforce lean a certain political way. But on the wider question of whether or not the Democrats are able to force this issue of healthcare onto the agenda, that is certainly something that Republicans are thinking about. Republicans at the moment are saying, we will actually talk about these subsidies and we will talk about reforms to Obamacare in this way. And Trump indeed indicated that in the White House as well. But the key condition is that the Democrats open the government first. And this is one of the big things that is the kind of big stumbling blocks at the moment, is that Democrats want key concessions on healthcare before they reopen the government. Republicans say you have to reopen the government for us to get around the table and actually discuss changing this. It's probably going to be quite some time before you see any kind of rising up of the Republican base in order to restore these credits. So yeah, it's not easy necessarily to see there being a great amount of Republican opposition at the moment.
And how is this shutdown playing out amongst the public? I mean, is it being seen as those websites for the Treasury and others were sort of indicating as the radical Democrats shutting down government, or is it being seen as President Trump's administration shutting down government? Who is it playing out well for?
So there is some good polling by YouGov and The Economist on this question, showing that when the shutdown, or shortly before the shutdown began, a third of participants said the Republicans and fewer, 27%, said the Democrats. But in recent days, the share blaming the Democrats rose by 3 percentage points to 30%. And the proportion naming the Republicans was up 8 points to 41%. So that means the Democrats have an advantage over the Republicans, suggesting that there has been some potential, albeit temporary, political gain for them at the moment on this, or that they're winning the air war and being able to blame the Republicans for this. But those numbers are quite marginal. And obviously we haven't yet seen any of those threatened mass layoffs, any of the kind of, promised threats that we've seen. So the lasting impact of this, I should say, remains very unclear. And a second point that I think is worth raising is that even if voters say, well, actually, the Republicans are in government and therefore I think that it makes more sense that the Republicans are to blame for this, their views could change in time. And one of the things that Democrats have been nervous about in this shutdown process is a sense that perhaps even if their case is quite strong, their leadership is just not up to the moment.
So while there's an opportunity for the Democrats, there's no confidence that they'll make the most of it. In terms of the huge job losses that are being threatened, I mean, is this just a threat? Is this a bargaining chip to get the Democrats to come and talk? Or how much of this do you think will lead to lasting change for America?
At this point, we're hearing from Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, who briefs journalists very regularly. Russell Vert is in conversations with people in the administration and government about which of these jobs would have to be made permanent. But it's not necessarily that simple for them politically either, the administration, because while Trump has said that he was meeting vote to talk about an unprecedented opportunity to make some of these layoffs, some people in the administration, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary included, have taken a much more cautious line on this and have said, actually this would be an unfortunate consequence of the shutdown, basically trying to make clear they don't want to fire these people, but they feel that if the Democrats are forcing them to do so, then they will do that. So it's a delicate political line for them. Do they want these layoffs? Do they not want these layoffs? At the moment, we haven't even seen these layoffs. So I think that's something we'll keep an eye out in coming days for.
And just finally, Lara, I mean, we've seen so much of this play out before in the first Trump administration. We saw Russell Vert trying to make massive cuts. We saw that they had to be reversed in the end. And then when the Democrats came in, they were completely reversed, really. How much of this is about lasting change? How much of it is the Washington, D.C. parlor game of brinkmanship and trying to negotiate and play a tough game? And how much of this is really about reshaping America?
I would say that example just goes to show why you see so much determination from those veterans of the first Trump administration, right? They see that many of these changes weren't made permanent, and they have spent a lot of time thinking about how to change government in a way that is lasting and durable. So I definitely think people are very serious about changes that they're making this time around. They want to have a situation where this administration changes politics in a way that can't just be undone by a future administration easily. I know I'd come back to it, but if you look at the example of USAID, they've definitely succeeded on that. This is not something where you would get a democratic president in the future and they would say, okay, look, we're going to restore aid to the tune of the billions that we did before. We're going to completely restart this whole infrastructure. I think given, fiscal circumstances, it's very hard to see even a relatively progressive democratic establishment coming in and doing that. I think they have really permanently changed the face of aid, and that will have been one of the objectives, right? So I think they'll be looking to do that in other areas of government to kind of test whether or not they can succeed in that more expansive view of presidential power. And for the moment, that obviously remains to be seen. We have these challenges in the courts, but let's just see.
That was Lara Spirit, Washington correspondent for The Times. The producers today were Micaela Arneson and Olivia Case. The executive producer was Edward Drummond. Sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. And today, we're proud to be launching a whole new podcast from The Times, The Business. Hosted by the brilliant journalists Hannah Previtt and Dominic O'Connell, it takes a deep dive into one business story every week, with special guests from the worlds of industry and finance. Starting today with an exclusive interview with Sir Jim Ratcliffe.
There are two halves to a football team. There's the business side and there's the sports side. And, you have to tackle them separately. The biggest correlation, whether we like it or not, but it's a fact, of results in football with an external factor is profitability. The more cash you've got, the better squad you can build. And at the end of the day, it's like the better your Formula One car, the quicker you go, the better your squad, the better your football should be, in principle.
So find The Business wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.